The desert remembers what men try to forget. Blood seeps into parched earth, leaving no stain, but marking the land forever. In this forgotten corner of Arizona, where no maps dare name the scattered buildings that once formed a town, something ancient stirs beneath the surface. A single gunshot echoes across the valley. Another follows. Then silence. The old stone well stands sentinel in the yard of a weathered house, its depths blacker than midnight. Those who peer too long into its darkness claim to hear whispers, a woman's voice calling from far below. The locals know to stay away. They speak in hushed tones of disappearances of men who came seeking fortune and vanished without trace. Some grounds have no name because names have power. Some debts can never be erased, only paid in full. Some justice waits patiently in darkness, neither living nor dead, but eternally watchful. The wind carries the scent of sage and death as the black angel returns to reckon with the past. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and death. Sarah Callahan's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as her old Ford pickup crested the hill, revealing the forgotten valley below. 10 years since she'd last seen this place. 10 years since she'd sworn never to return. The letter from her father sat on the passenger seat, its paper yellowed and creased from her reading it 100 times over the past week. Sarah, I need you to come home. The town is disappearing and the well is speaking again. Just 13 words. That was all it took to drag her back to the edge of hell. Home, she whispered, tasting the bitterness of the word. This place hadn't been home since her mother died 30 years ago, and after Liam's murder, she'd erased it from her map entirely. The truck's engine coughed as she downshifted, beginning the descent into the valley. The town, and what was left of it, sprawled below like a collection of sun-bleached bones. No name on any map, just a ghost of a place where ghosts refused to leave. Sarah caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. At 42, the lines around her eyes had deepened, and threads of gray streaked her once midnight black hair. The locals used to call her the Black Angel of Arizona, the youngest female sheriff in the state's history, with a reputation for justice that border criminals feared more than death itself. Now she was just Sarah, no badge, no gun, and certainly no wings. The truck bumped over a cattle guard and she winced as pain shot through her right shoulder, a souvenir from the bullet that had ended her career. Same night it had ended Liam's life. The houses grew more distinct as she approached. Most were abandoned windows, boarded or broken porches, sagging like tired mouse. A gas station with a single rusted pump stood sentinel at what passed for the town's entrance. The sign above it had been blank for so long that even the outline of letters had faded. A man sat in a rocking chair outside the station, his face hidden beneath the brim of a weathered cowboy hat. He didn't look up as Sarah's truck rolled past, but she felt his eyes following her. 3 minutes later, she pulled up to a small, weather-beaten house at the edge of town. The paint had long since surrendered to the elements, leaving the wood a silvery gray. A crooked mailbox hung by the gate bearing the single name, Callahan. Sarah cut the engine but didn't get out. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a silver medallion, her 10-year sobriety chip. She ran her thumb over its surface, feeling the serenity prayer etched into the metal. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, she murmured, then closed her fist around the chip. The front door of the house opened, and there he stood, James Callahan. At 75, he was a husk of the man she remembered. Once tall and imposing, he now stood slightly hunched, his frame thin beneath flannel and denim. His white hair hung to his shoulders and his beard was unkempt. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had once commanded respect throughout the county, they hadn't changed. You came, he said, his voice like gravel. Sarah pocketed the chip and stepped out of the truck. Your letter didn't leave much room for debate. The old man's gaze moved past her, scanning the horizon, as if expecting someone else. You alone. For 10 years now, she replied, the bitterness seeping through despite her efforts. James nodded, then turned back into the house without another word. Sarah retrieved her duffel bag from the truck bed and followed the screen door creaking behind her like a warning. The interior was dim and dusty. Time had stopped here. The same faded floral sofa, the same pine coffee table scarred with cigarette burns, the same deer head mounted on the wall, with its glass eyes forever watching. The only new addition was the collection of empty whiskey bottles lined up on the kitchen counter like soldiers at attention. "You want coffee?" James asked, already at the stove. "Sure." Sarah set her bag down and moved to the window. From here, she could see the backyard, a patch of hard-scrabble earth leading to the well. The old stone structure stood like a monument, its wooden cover weathered but intact. James followed her gaze. "She's awake," he said quietly. Sarah turned to him. "Who is—" "The woman in the well." He poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "Been quiet for years, now she's talking again." Sarah accepted the coffee without comment. Her father had always been eccentric, but this was new. She wondered if dementia had begun to claim him like it had her grandmother. "Dad, there's no woman in the well. There never was." James looked at her with something between pity and anger. "Your mother used to say the same thing." The mention of her mother sent a cold spike through Sarah's chest. "Don't." She didn't believe either. Not until the end. Sarah set her mug down, hard coffee sloshing over the rim. "I'm here because you said you needed care, not to listen to ghost stories." James shrugged. "Why'd you think I needed care? Because you're 75 and living alone in a ghost town. Because this place isn't even on maps anymore. Because normal people don't write about wells that talk." "Ah, this land ain't never been normal," James said. He moved to a kitchen drawer and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. "And I ain't the only one seeing things." Sarah took the clipping reluctantly. It was from a small regional paper dated 3 weeks ago. The headline read, "Local Man Missing in Unnamed Settlement." The article detailed the disappearance of Roy Mercer, 42, last seen heading to an abandoned mining settlement south of Pinewood to meet with a property owner about land acquisition. "Roy Mercer," Sarah read aloud, "one of Luther Mercer's boys." James nodded. "Luther's youngest. Got himself into the real estate business. Been sniffing around my property for months talking about some resort development." His lips curled in disgust. "He ain't the first to disappear neither." Sarah folded the clipping and handed it back. "People go missing in the desert all the time." "Not like this." James's voice dropped to a whisper. "They get swallowed. No trace." Sarah felt a headache building behind her eyes. "Dad, I didn't come back to play detective. Those days are over." James studied her face for a long moment. "You still having the dreams?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't told anyone about the nightmares, not even her therapist. The ones where she was back in that alley watching Liam bleed out while shadowy figures laughed from the darkness. "I don't dream anymore," she lied. James nodded, unconvinced. "Your room's still there, untouched." He shuffled toward the back door. "I'll be outside if you need me." After he left, Sarah stood in the kitchen feeling like an intruder in her childhood home. She moved down the hallway to her old bedroom, each step unleashing memories she'd spent a decade drowning in whiskey before finally getting sober. The room was indeed untouched. A teenage girl's shrine preserved in amber. Posters of 90s rock bands on the wall. A bookshelf filled with crime novels and forensic textbooks. The twin bed with its faded blue quilt. Sarah set her bag on the bed and opened the closet. Her high school clothes still hung there alongside something that made her breath catch. Her old sheriff's uniform cleaned and pressed. She closed the closet door firmly and returned to the kitchen where she found her father's medication lined up on the counter. Metoprolol for hypertension, warfarin for atrial fibrillation, Donepezil for early-stage Alzheimer's. Sarah's suspicions confirmed. Through the window, she watched her father standing by the well, his lips moving in conversation with someone who wasn't there. The following morning, Sarah woke before dawn, her body still on the schedule of a woman who hadn't worn a badge in a decade, but couldn't shake the habits it had instilled. She found James already awake sitting at the kitchen table cleaning an old revolver, a Colt 45 that had been her grandfather's. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Bit early for that, isn't it?" Sarah nodded toward the gun. "Sun comes up, predators go back to hiding. Best time to clean your weapons." He squinted down the barrel. "You still carrying—" Sarah poured herself coffee. "No, not for a long time." James made a disapproving sound. "Foolish. I don't need a gun to buy groceries in Portland." "You ain't in Portland now." He reassembled the revolver with practiced hands. "This land remembers blood, and it's getting hungry again." Sarah sighed. "Dad, I need to know what's really going on. Who's been threatening you?" James holstered the weapon. "Told you. Westland Development. They want my land. Send their men around with papers and promises. When that don't work, they send men who don't bother with papers." Westland. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Marcus Bishop's company." James's eyes narrowed. "You remember the name." "Of course I remember." Sarah gripped her mug tighter. "Bishop's family owned half the county when I was growing up. Liam was investigating their land deals before he—" She stopped herself. "Before he got shot in that alley," James finished for her. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Sarah had spent years connecting those same dots, only to watch her case fall apart from lack of evidence. The investigation into Liam's murder had been taken over by the state police, then quietly closed when witnesses recanted and evidence disappeared. "That was a long time ago," she said finally. "Not to them it wasn't. Bishop's boy, Marcus, he's running things now. Got his daddy's smile and his granddaddy's mean streak." James stood joints cracking. "Come on, need to show you something." Sarah followed him outside. The morning light painted the desert in gold, momentarily softening its harshness. James led her past the well to a small shed at the property's edge. Inside, a wall was covered with maps, newspaper clippings, and photographs connected by red string. A conspiracy board worthy of any detective show. "Jesus, Dad," Sarah stepped closer. "How long have you been working on this?" "Since the first man went missing, 6 months ago." James pointed to a photo of a heavyset man with a bull neck. "Frank Dawson. Came around offering to buy me out. Said he represented an interested party. When I refused, he got nasty. Threatened to have me declared incompetent." James moved his finger to another photo. "Week later, he drives out here again. Never makes it back to town. His truck found empty about a mile from here." He pointed to 3 more photos. Then Tyler Ross, then Marcus's lawyer, then Roy Mercer. Sarah studied the board. "Did the police investigate?" James laughed, a harsh barking sound. "What police county sheriff comes out once a month to make sure the old folks ain't died in their sleep? Took one look around and decided these boys just got lost in the desert. And you don't think that's what happened?" James looked at her with those piercing eyes. "I know it ain't." "Then what happened to them?" James turned back to the board. "The well took them." Sarah rubbed her temple. "Dad, I know how it sounds," he interrupted, "but you forget what this land is, what it was built on." "I haven't forgotten anything," Sarah said quietly. James pulled down an old map from the wall, a survey document from 1864. "This whole valley was a mining operation during the war. Not official, not on any records. Just men with guns forcing other men to dig." He traced a line along the property. "Our land sits right on top of the main shaft. Most productive section." Sarah knew this history. Every child who grew up here did. The nameless settlement had been built on the graves of over 200 workers. Criminals, drifters, and Navajo prisoners forced to excavate the earth until it or their bodies gave out. What does an old mine have to do with missing real estate developers? James reattached the map to the wall. "Everything flows back to the source, Sarah. Everything." He turned to her. "I think they found something down there. Something they shouldn't have disturbed." Sarah wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of an old man losing his grip on reality, but something in his conviction gave her pause. "Have you been down in the mine?" James shook his head. "Sealed it up years ago. After your mother—" The unfinished sentence hung between them like a ghost. Sarah changed the subject. "Do you need anything from town groceries?" "Milk, coffee, the usual." James seemed relieved by the shift. Pinewood's the closest now, 30 minutes west. Sarah nodded and headed back to the house to get her keys. As she passed the well, a cold breeze seemed to emanate from it, carrying what sounded like a whisper. She paused, listening. Nothing. Just the wind playing tricks. Pinewood was barely more substantial than her father's settlement. A collection of storefronts along a two-lane highway, dominated by a combination gas station and general store. As Sarah filled her truck, she noticed the stares from locals. Small towns had long memories, and she'd once been notorious in these parts. She wondered how much they remembered of the young sheriff who'd left in disgrace after her husband's murder. Inside the store, she gathered supplies while eavesdropping on the gossip. Most conversations centered around the usual small-town concerns. Weather crops, someone's wayward son. Then a name caught her ear. Third one this year to go missing near old Callahan's place. Sarah slowed her pace, lingering near the conversation between the cashier and an elderly customer. "My grandson used to work with Roy Mercer," the customer said. "Says the family's beside themselves. No sign of him for nearly a month now." "That old Callahan's got the devil's own luck," the cashier replied. "Everyone who crosses him seems to vanish into thin air." "It ain't luck," a new voice interjected. Sarah turned to see a gaunt man in his 60s leaning on a cane near the magazine rack. His weathered face spoke of a lifetime under the desert sun, and his dark eyes held the distinctive features of Navajo heritage. "Joseph," the cashier acknowledged with obvious discomfort. "Didn't see you come in." "Never do," Joseph replied, his gaze now fixed on Sarah. "Been a long time, Sheriff Callahan." Sarah approached him, ignoring the sudden silence in the store. "I haven't been sheriff in a decade, Mr. Quaid. Joseph Quaid." He extended a calloused hand. "I used to do odd jobs for your father when you were just a deputy." Sarah shook his hand, searching her memory. "I remember now. You lived out past the creek bed." Joseph nodded. "Still do. Last of my people in the valley." He glanced around at the eavesdropping customers, then lowered his voice. "Your father doing all right, as well as can be expected." Joseph studied her face. "He tell you about the woman yet?" Sarah felt a chill. "What woman?" "The one in the ground." Joseph's expression remained unreadable. "The one who's been sleeping all these years." Before Sarah could respond, the store's bell jingled and 3 men entered. The leader, tall blonde, wearing an expensive shirt under a casual jacket, radiated an easy confidence that came from generations of privilege. He was flanked by 2 burlier men with the hard eyes of former military. The room's temperature seemed to drop as conversations died. Sarah recognized him immediately, though he'd aged from the arrogant teenager she'd known to a sharper, more dangerous version. Marcus Bishop. He scanned the store, his eyes landing on Sarah with a flash of recognition followed by a slow, predatory smile. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled, approaching her. "Sarah Callahan back from the dead." "Marcus," she acknowledged, keeping her voice neutral. "Still buying your way through life, I see." He laughed, genuinely amused. "And you're still a ray of sunshine. What brings Arizona's former finest back to our humble corner of nowhere? Family business." "Ah, yes, good old James." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "How is the old man, still hearing voices from his, well?" Sarah maintained her composure. "He's fine, thank you for asking." "Glad to hear it." Marcus's tone suggested otherwise. "You know, I've been trying to get in touch with him about a business proposition. Perhaps you could help facilitate." "I doubt he's interested." "Oh, but he should be. Very generous offer. Enough to set him up comfortably for the rest of his days." Marcus stepped closer, his cologne expensive and cloying. "That land's not doing anyone any good just sitting there." "It's not for sale." Marcus's smile remained, but his eyes hardened. "Everything has a price, Sarah. Your father taught me that a long time ago." Before she could respond, Joseph Quaid stepped between them, his cane tapping the floor for emphasis. "The lady's trying to shop Bishop. Why don't you take your business elsewhere?" Marcus's expression shifted, contempt replacing charm. "Mr. Quaid, still haunting these parts, I see. Thought your kind would have moved on by now." "My kind has been here since before your grandfather stole his first acre," Joseph replied evenly. "We'll be here when your name is forgotten." For a moment, the tension in the store was thick enough to cut. Then Marcus laughed, breaking the spell. Always a pleasure catching up with the locals. He nodded to his companions and headed for the door. Oh, and Sarah, he called over his shoulder. Do give my best to James. Tell him I'll be seeing him soon. After they left, the store slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Sarah finished her shopping in silence. Joseph quayed a quiet presence nearby. As she loaded her groceries into the truck, Joseph approached again. Bishop's after your father's land, something fierce, he said. So I gathered. Sarah closed the tailgate. Any idea why that particular plot is so important? It's not exactly prime real estate. Joseph glanced around before answering. There are stories about that mine, old stories, about what was found there during the war. Annie. Gold, Sarah guessed. Something more valuable. Joseph leaned closer. And more dangerous. What exactly? Truth. Joseph straightened up. Go ask your father about Maya. Ask him who she was to him. He turned to leave, then paused. And Sarah, don't go near that well after dark, no matter what voices you hear. Sarah watched him hobble away, questions multiplying in her mind. She drove back to her father's house with Joseph's words echoing alongside Marcus's threat. The sun was setting as she pulled up to the property. No lights shone from the windows. Sarah called out as she entered but received no answer. The house was empty. A noise from the backyard drew her attention. Through the kitchen window, she could make out her father's silhouette in the twilight standing by the well. Sarah stepped outside, moving quietly across the dry earth. James was leaning over the well's edge, speaking in low, urgent tones. I know, he was saying, but she's here now. She'll understand once I explain. Dad, Sarah called. James straightened quickly, turning to face her. You're back. Who were you talking to? James hesitated, then sighed. Maya. The woman in the well, Sarah said, remembering Joseph's words. Dad, who is Maya? For a moment, James looked like he might actually explain. Then his expression closed. Get inside. It's not safe out here after dark. Not until you tell me what's going on. Sarah stood her ground. I ran into Marcus Bishop in town. He seems very interested in this property. James's face hardened. Bishop can go to hell. He implied he'd be paying you a visit soon. Let him come. James's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. He'll get the same welcome as the others. A cold realization washed over Sarah. Dad, what happened to those men who disappeared? James looked at her for a long moment, then back at the well. They got what they deserved. Did you hurt them? Sarah asked quietly. No. James turned away. But I didn't stop it either. Before Sarah could press further, the sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. Headlights appeared on the dirt road leading to the house. Inside, James ordered. Now. Dad. Now, Sarah. The command held the authority of the man he'd once been. Sarah retreated to the house, watching from the window as a black SUV pulled up. Two men got out, not Marcus, but his associates from the store. One carried a folder, the other kept his hand inside his jacket. James met them in the yard, revolver visible at his side. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see it growing heated. The man with the folder became increasingly agitated, jabbing his finger toward the house. James remained impassive, shaking his head. Finally, the second man pulled out his concealed hand, now holding a gun. Sarah's heart raced. She scanned the room for a weapon, finding nothing but kitchen knives. Outside, James hadn't moved despite the gun pointed at him. The standoff continued for several tense seconds before James said something that made both men look toward the well. The air seemed to still. A sound rose from the darkness, a low, mournful wail that raised the hair on Sarah's arms. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was a woman's voice, distant yet clear, calling in a language Sarah didn't recognize. The men backed away, clearly unnerved. The one with the gun fired a wild shot into the air before they both scrambled back to their vehicle. As the SUV peeled away, Sarah burst out of the house. What the hell was that? She demanded. James turned to her, his face illuminated by the rising moon. That was Maya. There's no one in the well, Dad. I want the truth. James looked suddenly exhausted. Truth is a luxury we can't afford, Sarah. Not in this place. Those men had guns. This isn't some game. You think I don't know that? James snapped. You think I don't know what they're capable of? He moved closer, his voice dropping. These are the same people who put your husband in the ground, the same people who've been trying to take this land for generations. And what's so special about this land that people are willing to kill for it? Sarah demanded. James looked toward the well again. It's not the land they want. It's what's underneath it. Before Sarah could respond, James walked past her toward the shed. Get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll show you. Sarah stood alone in the yard, the night air cold against her skin. From the well she thought she heard it again, that soft, keening sound. A woman's voice calling from deep below the earth. She approached the stone structure, cautiously peering over its edge into darkness. The moonlight revealed nothing but black emptiness. "Hello," she called softly, feeling foolish. "Is anyone there?" Only silence answered. Sarah turned to go, then froze at a sound behind her. Not from the well, but from the shadows near the property's edge. A rustling movement, then stillness. "Who's there?" she called, reaching instinctively for a weapon she no longer carried. No response, but she felt eyes watching her from the darkness. Sarah backed slowly toward the house, never turning away from the shadows. Inside, she locked the door and checked the windows, old instincts returning. In her room, she pulled her duffel bag from under the bed and unzipped a hidden compartment. Inside lay a 9mm Glock, the personal weapon she'd sworn she'd never carry again. She checked the magazine, then tucked the gun under her pillow. That night, Sarah dreamed of a woman with copper skin and obsidian eyes reaching up from the bottom of a well. Her arms were impossibly long, stretching toward the surface, fingers curling like roots seeking water. "Justice," the woman whispered, her voice like stones grinding together. "Justice sleeps beneath the earth." Sarah woke with a gasp, sweat soaking her shirt despite the cool night air. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. She reached for the glass of water beside her bed, hands trembling. As she drank, a sound from outside caught her attention. The creak of the screen door, followed by footsteps on the porch. Sarah grabbed the Glock and moved silently to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. In the moonlight, she could see her father crossing the yard, dragging something heavy behind him. No, not something. Someone. A man bound and gagged, struggling weakly against James's grip. Sarah watched in horror as her father pulled the man toward the well. The captive's muffled pleas carried on the night air. James paused at the well's edge, looking down into its depths. "She's hungry," he said, voice carrying in the stillness. "Been too long." The bound man thrashed more violently, but James held firm, beginning to lift him toward the well's edge. Sarah burst through the front door, gun raised. "Dad, stop!" James turned, his face ghostly in the moonlight. The captive, a young man Sarah didn't recognize, stared at her with desperate eyes above his gag. "Go back inside, Sarah," James said calmly. "This doesn't concern you? Put him down, now." Sarah advanced slowly, weapon steady. "You don't understand what's happening here. I understand you're about to kill a man." James looked genuinely confused. "Kill him? No, I'm giving him to her. There's a difference. There's no her, Dad. There's no woman in the well." Sarah's voice cracked with frustration. "You're sick. You need help." James released his grip on the man, who collapsed to the ground. "We let your mother die, Sarah. We didn't believe her when she tried to warn us." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Now it's their turn to pay." Sarah kept her gun trained on her father as she approached the bound man. Without taking her eyes off James, she pulled down the captive's gag. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Jason Mercer." The man gasped. "Roy's brother. Please." "Why are you here?" "Looking for Roy. He disappeared weeks ago." Jason's voice shook. "Someone said they saw his car near here, but no one would talk to me." Sarah's mind raced. Another Mercer, another connection to the land deals. "Dad, where's Roy Mercer?" she asked quietly. James looked toward the well. "Where all the others are." "What did you do?" "I told you, I didn't do anything." James's eyes were clear, his voice steady. "I just let Maya have what's rightfully hers." "For God's sake, there is no Maya," Sarah shouted. James looked at her with pity. "Then who do you think is standing behind you right now?" A cold dread seized Sarah's spine. Slowly she turned her head. A woman stood at the edge of the well. Tall, unnaturally still, her long black hair hanging in wet ropes around a face Sarah couldn't quite make out in the shadows. Water pooled at her bare feet, glistening in the moonlight. Sarah blinked, and the figure was gone, if it had ever been there at all. Jason Mercer had seen it too. He began screaming behind his replaced gag, thrashing against his bonds with renewed panic. "Now, do you understand?" James asked quietly. Sarah's hand shook, the gun suddenly heavy. What was that?" "That was Maya." James approached slowly. "And we have much to discuss." Sarah lowered her weapon, mind reeling. The rational part of her brain searched for explanations. Hallucination trick of the light-shared delusion. But deeper instincts told her something else entirely. "What is she?" Sarah whispered. James took the gun gently from her trembling hand. "Something this land created. Something it needs." He looked down at the terrified Jason Mercer. "And she's very, very hungry." Sarah stared at her father, seeing a stranger in the familiar face. "What have you done?" "What I had to," James replied. "To protect what's ours, what's been entrusted to us." He gestured toward the well. "The truth is down there, Sarah. All of it. The mine, your mother, Liam. It's all connected." "Liam," Sarah's voice caught. "What does my husband have to do with this?" "Everything." James's eyes held a terrible knowledge. He found out what was down there, what Bishop's family has been trying to get their hands on for 3 generations. He reached out his weathered hand, cupping her cheek. "Why do you think they killed him, Sarah? Why do you think they made sure you took the fall?" The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. 10 years of guilt, grief, and unanswered questions crashed over her. "Tomorrow," James said softly. "I'll show you everything tomorrow." He nodded toward Jason Mercer. "But first we need to decide what to do with him." Sarah looked at the bound man, his eyes wide with terror. Whatever she had just witnessed, hallucination or apparition, this was real. A man tied up by her father, destined for some fate she couldn't comprehend. "We're letting him go," she said firmly. James's expression hardened. "If we do that, he'll be back. With Bishop. With the police." "Then let them come." Sarah straightened her shoulders, something of the sheriff she'd once been returning to her bearing. "No more disappearances. No more secrets." She met her father's gaze. "It's time for the truth, Dad. All of it." For a long moment, father and daughter stood in silent confrontation, the bound man forgotten between them. Then, almost imperceptibly, James nodded. "The truth?" he agreed quietly. "God help us both." From the well, a soft sound rose like a sigh. Neither approval nor lament, but acknowledgement. The wind picked up, carrying dust and whispers across the nameless ground. Morning came with the harsh clarity of desert light. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, watching Jason Mercer devour a plate of eggs and toast. They'd kept him bound overnight, locked in the shed, despite Sarah's protests. Only her promise that they'd release him after he heard their story had convinced James not to do worse. "My brother," Jason said between mouthfuls. "Is he alive?" His eyes darted nervously between Sarah and James, who stood by the window watching the horizon. "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "But he was here, you saw him." James turned. "He came looking for trouble, same as you." "Roy was just doing his job," Jason insisted. "Marcus Bishop hired him to negotiate land purchases for the resort project." "Westland Development doesn't build resorts," James said coldly. "They extract. They exploit. They destroy." Jason pushed his plate away. "Look, I don't care about your land or whatever grudge you have against Bishop. I just want to find my brother." And Sarah moved to refill his coffee. "To do that, we need to understand what's happening here." She glanced at her father. "All of it." James nodded slowly. He retrieved a rusted key from behind a loose brick in the fireplace. "Time you both saw the truth." Outside, the day was building toward scorching heat. James led them past the well, Jason giving it a wide berth, to a small rise beyond the property line. A wooden cross stood there, weathered and leaning, with one arm broken off. Carved into its face were the words, "Forgive me." James knelt beside the cross and brushed away years of accumulated sand, revealing a metal hatch set into the earth. "Mine entrance," Sarah asked. "Emergency exit," James corrected. "Main shaft collapsed years ago. This was a maintenance tunnel." He inserted the key into a padlock that seemed far newer than the hatch itself. The lock opened with reluctant protest. James pulled the hatch up, releasing the smell of damp earth and something older, the lingering breath of history. "I'll go first," James said, producing a flashlight from his pocket. "Watch your step." The tunnel was narrow, its walls reinforced with ancient timbers that creaked ominously. Sarah followed her father with Jason behind her, his wrists now unbound, but his movements hesitant. The air grew thicker as they descended, heavy with moisture and memory. After about 50 yards, the passage widened into a chamber, roughly the size of Sarah's childhood bedroom. James's flashlight illuminated walls etched with primitive symbols, a mixture of Navajo patterns and cruder markings. "Worker graffiti," James explained, running his fingers over the engravings. "Men left down here for weeks at a time. Some went mad." "Dad, what was this place exactly?" Sarah asked, the darkness pressing in around the small pool of light. James moved deeper into the chamber, illuminating rusty tools scattered across the floor. During the Civil War, both sides needed gold. The Confederates secretly established mining operations in neutral territories, places where federal troops wouldn't look. He led them through another passage into a larger cavern. Here the remnants of industrial activity were more evident: support beams, cart tracks, the skeleton of a pulley system. "This valley yielded one of the richest veins in Arizona," James continued. "Problem was they couldn't get enough workers, so they raided Navajo settlements, took prisoners from territorial jails, anyone who wouldn't be missed." "Slave labor," Sarah said quietly. James nodded grimly. "Over 200 men died in these tunnels. Accident, disease, punishment. Their bodies were sealed in collapsed sections, cheaper than bringing them up for burial." Jason stayed close to Sarah, eyes wide with unease. "What does this have to do with my brother?" "Everything," James's voice echoed in the darkness. "Because what they found down here wasn't just gold." He directed his light toward another tunnel branching from the main cavern. This one was different. Its entrance elaborately reinforced the wood, newer than the surrounding structures. This section was sealed off in 1864. The official record claims it was due to dangerous gases. James approached the tunnel. "I reopened it in the 70s after I inherited the property." "You were a mine supervisor?" Sarah asked, surprised. Her father had never spoken of his work before becoming a rancher. "Assistant supervisor, worked for Bishop's grandfather." James's face hardened at the memory. Man was a demon in human skin, treated the land like it owed him something. He led them into the reinforced tunnel. The air grew noticeably colder, the walls smoother as if shaped by different tools. "The workers hit something here," James explained, his voice dropping. "Something that wasn't supposed to be found." The tunnel opened into a small, roughly circular chamber. Unlike the industrial spaces they'd passed through, this one bore signs of deliberate construction. The floor had been leveled, the walls partly lined with fitted stone. In the center stood a stone altar of unmistakable Navajo design. James aimed his light at the far wall, revealing a crude mural painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. It depicted a woman emerging from the earth, her arms outstretched, surrounded by smaller figures, bowing in supplication or fear. "The miners uncovered a sacred site," Sarah whispered, understanding dawning. "A Navajo holy place." "Not holy," James corrected. "Cursed, a prison." His light traced the painted figures' elongated arms. The elders of Joseph Quade's tribe had sealed something here, something they feared. "Maya," Sarah said softly. James nodded. "When the miners broke through, they released her, or part of her." He moved the light to reveal a section of wall where the natural rock gave way to carefully laid stones, newer than the rest, yet still decades old. They managed to contain her again, but not before she killed 17 men. Jason backed toward the tunnel. "This is insane. You're both crazy." His voice cracked with fear. "Your brother came here looking for gold," James said, ignoring his panic. "Bishop convinced him there was still a fortune buried in these hills, and in a way he was right." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. James directed his light to a section of wall behind the altar. There, embedded in the stone, was a vein of gleaming metal. Not gold, but something darker, with an oily iridescence that seemed to shift colors as the light played across it. "The miners called it black gold," James explained. It's not on any geological chart, not listed in any mining record, but Bishop's family has been trying to get their hands on it for 3 generations. Sarah approached the vein cautiously. Despite the beam of light upon it, the material seemed to absorb rather than reflect, creating an illusion of depth beyond the rock face. "What is it?" she asked. "Nobody knows for certain. Government geologists who studied samples in the 50s couldn't classify it." James's face was grim. "But it has properties." "Properties," Sarah repeated skeptically. "It amplifies things. Emotions, energy, intentions." James touched the stone wall near the vein, but carefully avoided the material itself. The Navajo believed it was the physical manifestation of an evil spirit, that it could grant power, but at terrible cost. "This is why Bishop wants the land," Sarah realized. "Not for development, for this." James nodded. "His grandfather discovered it during the war, took samples, experimented. When the results proved too dangerous, the military ordered the mine sealed." "Dangerous how?" Sarah pressed. "The metal affects people's minds, creates hallucinations, paranoia. Prolonged exposure can cause violent psychosis." James looked at her meaningfully. "Your mother was the first to understand its connection to Maya." Now, the mention of her mother sent a chill through Sarah. "Mom was never down here." "Not physically," James agreed. "But the well on our property, it connects to the deepest part of the mine. That's how Maya communicates." "Dad, there is no Maya." Sarah insisted, though, with less conviction than before. "Whatever happened last night was real," James interrupted. "As real as those disappearances, as real as what happened to your mother." He moved closer, his face half shadowed. "And as real as what happened to Liam." The name hung in the cold air between them. Sarah felt her chest tighten. "What are you saying?" "Liam was investigating Westland Development's land acquisitions," James said. "He traced their pattern, all properties surrounding old mining operations, all containing potential deposits of this material." He pointed to the black vein. "When he got too close to the truth, they eliminated him." Sarah's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle she'd been assembling for 10 years. "The night he died, Liam told me he'd discovered something big, something that went beyond local corruption." "Bishop's father was working with military contractors," James confirmed. "They wanted the material for weapons research, mind control, psychological warfare." His voice dropped lower. "But Maya wouldn't allow it." Jason, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Who is Maya really?" James turned to him. "According to Navajo legend, a powerful medicine woman who turned to dark magic. Her tribe imprisoned her spirit in the earth, binding it to the substance." He gestured toward the black vein. "When the miners broke through, they partially released her. She killed those who defiled her prison, but couldn't fully escape." "Er. So you believe what? That she's some kind of ghost?" Sarah couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice, despite what she'd witnessed the night before. "Not a ghost," James replied. "Something older, something the land remembers." He turned to face Sarah fully. "Your mother could hear her through the well. At first we thought she was having episodes. Her mental health had always been fragile. But then the dreams started, the visions." Sarah remembered those terrible years, her mother's descent into what the doctors had called paranoid schizophrenia, the claims that a woman was speaking to her from the well, the insistence that they were coming to steal something precious. "Mom killed herself," Sarah said flatly. "She wasn't possessed by some entity." "Maya didn't possess her," James corrected. "She tried to warn her about Bishop, about what they planned to do with the mine." His voice broke slightly. "I didn't believe her until it was too late." Jason had edged closer to the tunnel entrance. "This is completely insane." "You saw her last night," James reminded him. "You know what I'm saying is true." Before Jason could reply, a low rumble shook the chamber, dust cascading from the ceiling. The flashlight beam wavered as James steadied himself against the wall. "What was that?" Sarah asked, heart racing. "Someone's opened the main shaft," James said, suddenly alert. "We need to go, now." They hurried back through the tunnels, the rumbling growing louder. As they approached the emergency exit, voices echoed from deeper in the mine. Men shouting orders, the clank of equipment. "Bishop," James growled. "He must have found the old main entrance." They emerged into harsh daylight, James securing the hatch behind them. Sarah squinted against the sun, trying to orient herself. "We need to get back to the house," James said urgently. "Where I can protect—" He never finished the sentence. A sharp crack split the air, and James staggered, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Dad!" Sarah rushed to him as he sank to his knees. Another shot kicked up dust near her feet. She looked up to see three figures approaching from the direction of the property. Marcus Bishop, flanked by armed men. "Sarah Callahan," Bishop called, lowering his handgun. "Still getting in the way after all these years." Sarah helped her father to his feet, supporting his weight. "You shot an unarmed man, Bishop." "A trespasser on my property," Bishop corrected smoothly. "This land belongs to my father," Sarah snarled. Bishop smiled coldly. "Not according to the deed I'm holding." He produced a folded document from his jacket. "Signed last month by James Callahan himself." Sarah looked at her father in shock. "Dad!" James's face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes burned with fury. "Forgery! I never signed anything." "Your signature suggests otherwise," Bishop replied. He turned to his men. "Secure the emergency shaft. I want a team down there within the hour." His gaze returned to Sarah. "As for you and the old man, consider this your eviction notice." Jason Mercer stepped forward, hands raised. "Mr. Bishop, it's me, Jason Mercer, Roy's brother. Have you found him?" Bishop regarded him with mild surprise. "Mr. Mercer, what an unexpected pleasure." His expression shifted to concern. "I'm afraid we haven't located Roy yet. Were you being held captive by these people?" "They locked me in a shed," Jason confirmed, moving toward Bishop. "They're completely insane, talking about some woman in a well and spirits in the mine." "It's all right, Jason," Bishop soothed. "You're safe now." He nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward as if to escort Jason away. The man's hand clamped on Jason's shoulder. In one smooth motion, he raised his other hand, now holding a knife, and sliced it across Jason's throat. Sarah screamed as Jason collapsed, blood spurting between his fingers as he clutched at the wound. He looked at Bishop with shocked, betraying eyes before crumpling to the ground. "Such a shame," Bishop remarked, watching dispassionately as Jason twitched and went still. "The Mercer brothers never could mind their own business, always asking too many questions." He gestured to his men. "Dispose of him with the others." Sarah's rage exploded. She lunged at Bishop, only to be intercepted by one of his men. A heavy blow to her stomach doubled her over, driving the air from her lungs. "I expected more from the legendary Black Angel," Bishop taunted as she gasped for breath. "But then you've been out of practice for some time, haven't you?" "You killed Liam," Sarah managed, straightening despite the pain. "You had my husband murdered." Bishop's smile never wavered. "Liam was a good cop. Too good. He wouldn't take a bribe, wouldn't look the other way." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "But he died thinking his beloved wife had betrayed him, that you were the one feeding me information. That was my favorite part." White-hot fury threatened to blind Sarah. She tensed to attack again, but her father's grip on her arm held her back. "Not now," James whispered urgently. "He'll kill us both." Bishop watched their exchange with amusement. "Listen to your father, Sarah. He knows when to surrender." He checked his watch. "You have 1 hour to collect your belongings and vacate my property. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and James." His smile turned predatory. "Maya sends her regards." As Bishop and his men moved toward the mine entrance, dragging Jason's body, Sarah helped her wounded father toward the house. "How does he know about Maya?" she asked, voice shaking with rage and fear. James winced as they navigated the uneven ground. "Because she speaks to him, too." "I don't understand." "Maya isn't choosy about who she communicates with," James explained, his breathing labored. "She whispers to anyone who will listen. Bishop, his father, his grandfather. They all heard her. Difference is they want to use her power, control it." When they reached the house, Sarah kicking the door open and helping James to a chair. She found the first aid kit and began examining his wound. "The bullet went through," she reported, cleaning away blood. Missed anything vital, but you've lost a lot of blood. James barely seemed to notice the pain. We don't have much time. Bishop will be back with more men. We need to get you to a hospital, Sarah insisted, bandaging the wound. No. James gripped her wrist with surprising strength. We need to stop him. If Bishop reopens the main shaft and extracts that material, people will die. Not just here. Everywhere. Dad, we need to call the police. James laughed bitterly. And tell them that a mining company is trying to extract a supernatural metal that an ancient spirit is killing trespassers. He shook his head. Bishop owns the local authorities, has for generations. Sarah finished bandaging his shoulder, her mind racing. Then we run. Get somewhere safe, contact the federal authorities. No time, James repeated. Once Bishop establishes control of the mine, he'll have military contractors on site within days. Whatever prototype weapons they're developing, they'll have the raw materials they need. His eyes locked with hers. This is bigger than us, Sarah. Bigger than Liam. Bigger than your mother. This is about stopping something truly evil from being unleashed. What can we possibly do against Bishop's men? They're armed, organized. James's expression hardened. We have something they don't. What? Maya. As dusk approached, Sarah watched from the kitchen window as Bishop's men established a perimeter around the property. 4 SUVs had arrived with additional security, ex-military types with assault rifles and tactical gear. A portable generator hummed near the mine entrance, powering industrial lights that cast the area in harsh, white illumination. James sat at the table behind her, methodically cleaning his revolver, despite the pain in his shoulder. He'd refused to leave, instead, spending the afternoon gathering supplies, ammunition, flashlights, water bottles, and explaining his plan. You can't be serious, Sarah said, turning from the window. You want to collapse the mine with what we don't have: explosives. Don't need them. James loaded the final chamber and spun the cylinder. The main support structure is already compromised. Remove the right beams and the whole thing comes down. While we're still inside, that's suicide. Not if we use the emergency exit. James holstered the weapon. Bishop doesn't know about the secondary tunnels, the ones Maya showed me. Sarah ran a hand through her hair in frustration. This is insanity. We should be calling the FBI, not planning some kamikaze mission. By the time the feds mobilize, Bishop will have extracted enough of that material to make whatever weapons he's planning. James countered. We have one chance, tonight, while they're still setting up operations. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah drew the Glock from her waistband, moving cautiously to answer it. Joseph Quaid stood on the porch, leaning on his cane, his weathered face grave in the fading light. You should be gone by now, he said without preamble. Come in, Sarah replied, checking for watchers before closing the door behind him. Joseph nodded to James. Bishop's men are at my place too. Gave me the same eviction notice. How did you get past them? Sarah asked. Joseph's lips curved in a humorless smile. My people have been avoiding white men on this land for centuries. Few old trails they don't know about. James gestured for Joseph to sit. Bishop's reopened the main shaft. Plans to start extraction tomorrow. I know, Joseph said grimly. The earth is screaming. Maya is restless. Sarah looked between the two men. You believe all this too about Maya? Joseph regarded her with ancient eyes. What I believe doesn't matter. What matters is what is. Maya exists. The black metal exists. And Bishop must be stopped. Joseph's grandfather was one of the tribal elders who originally sealed Maya in the earth, James explained. His family has been keeping watch for generations. And failing, Joseph added bitterly. When the miners broke through, my grandfather tried to warn them. They shot him, called it an uprising. Sarah paced the small kitchen. Even if I accept all this, Maya, the metal, everything, how does collapsing the mine help? Won't that just bury the material for someone else to find later? Not if we bind it properly, Joseph said. The ritual requires blood, a willing sacrifice to seal Maya's prison forever. Sarah stared at him. Sacrifice, as in human sacrifice. It was my family's responsibility. Joseph continued, ignoring her shock. But I'm the last one. Too old, too sick to complete the ritual properly. He looked at James. That's why you stayed, isn't it? You promised her. James nodded slowly. After what happened to Catherine, to Sarah's mother, I made a vow. You promised to kill yourself, Sarah asked incredulously. To make amends, James corrected, for not believing, for letting them take her. A terrible suspicion formed in Sarah's mind. Dad, what really happened to Mom? James's eyes filled with long-buried grief. Bishop's father wanted our land. I refused to sell. So they took your mother, used her mental instability against us. Had her committed, his voice broke. They experimented on her, with the black metal, trying to get her to communicate with Maya to translate what she was saying. The metal drove her insane, Joseph added softly. When James finally got her released, she wasn't the same person. She killed herself 2 weeks later, Sarah whispered, childhood memories rearranging themselves into a darker pattern. No, James's voice was lead. She didn't kill herself. She was trying to reach Maya through the well. To warn us, she fell. His hands trembled slightly. I couldn't save her, just like I couldn't save Liam when he started asking questions about the same company, the same project years later. The weight of revelation pressed on Sarah's shoulders. Everything she thought she knew about her family, about her husband's death, was being rewritten. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice hollow. What could I say? James replied. That your mother was communicating with an ancient spirit, that a mining company killed her to get at a supernatural metal. You were 16, Sarah. You needed stability, not more trauma. Sarah leaned against the countermine, reeling. Outside, the generator's hum grew louder as more lights came on around the mine entrance. Time was running out. So what's the plan? She asked finally. James and Joseph exchanged glances. Joseph reached into his jacket and removed a small leather pouch. We enter through the emergency exit, he explained, placing the pouch on the table. Make our way to the sacred chamber. I'll prepare the binding ritual while you two collapse the main tunnel to buy us time. And the sacrifice? Sarah asked, her throat dry. Joseph looked at James. A life freely given. Blood of the one who broke the original seal. My grandfather was the mine supervisor when they first broke through to Maya's prison, James explained quietly. That blood debt passed to my father, then to me. No, Sarah said firmly. There has to be another way. There isn't, James replied. I've made my peace with it. I just found you again, Sarah protested, unexpected tears stinging her eyes. I'm not losing you too. James stood wincing at the pain in his shoulder. You lost me years ago, Sarah, when I couldn't protect your mother, when I couldn't save Liam. This is my chance to make things right. Before Sarah could argue further, the lights outside suddenly went out. The generator's hum sputtered and died, plunging the property into darkness. She's moving, Joseph said, rising quickly despite his age. Maya knows what's coming. As if in response, a low wail rose from the direction of the well. The same sound Sarah had heard the night before, but louder now, more urgent. We need to go, James said, grabbing his supplies. Through the back. Now. Outside, shouts of confusion came from Bishop's men as flashlight beams crisscrossed the yard. Someone called for the generator to be restarted. Sarah followed her father and Joseph through the darkness, her police training taking over as she moved silently across familiar terrain. They skirted the edge of the property, keeping low, using the confusion to mask their escape. As they passed the well, Sarah felt a cold presence, like stepping through a waterfall. For just a moment, she thought she saw a woman's silhouette against the night sky, impossibly tall, arms outstretched. She's with us, Joseph whispered. They reached the emergency hatch without incident. James unlocked it while Sarah kept watch, the distant flashlights of Bishop's men still focused on the house and main shaft. One by one, they descended into darkness. Joseph went first, then James, with Sarah bringing up the rear. She pulled the hatch closed above them, sealing away the night sky. The tunnel felt different now, colder, damper. Their flashlight beams caught swirling dust motes that seemed to move against the air currents, forming patterns that dissolved when looked at directly. This way, James whispered, leading them not toward the main chamber they'd visited earlier, but down a narrower passage that Sarah hadn't noticed before. Hidden access, Joseph explained, noting her confusion. For the guards who watched Maya's prison. The passage twisted downward deeper than they'd gone that morning. The air grew thick with moisture, and the walls glistened with an oily residue that reflected their lights in rainbow patterns. We're getting close, Joseph murmured. Can you feel it? Sarah could. A vibration in the stone around them, almost too low to hear, but felt in the bones. A presence, watching, waiting. The tunnel widened suddenly into a cavern, unlike anything they'd seen in the mine. Natural stone pillars rose to a ceiling lost in darkness. The floor had been smoothed and etched with intricate patterns that spiraled toward the center, where a pool of black water reflected nothing. Maya's true prison, Joseph said with reverence, deeper than the chamber the miners found. This is where she waits. James approached the pool cautiously. The ritual needs to be performed here. Joseph nodded, opening his leather pouch. It contained various herbs, a small carved stone figure, and an obsidian knife with a bone handle. I'll need time, he said. You two should collapse the main tunnel as planned. It will slow Bishop's men when they realize we're down here. Sarah hesitated, unwilling to leave the old man alone in this strange place. Will you be safe? Joseph smiled sadly. No one is safe in Maya's presence, but she knows I'm here to help. A distant rumble echoed through the tunnels, the sound of machinery men working. They've restarted operations, James said urgently. We need to move. With a last glance at Joseph, who had begun arranging items around the pool's edge, Sarah followed her father back into the tunnel system. They navigated a complex network of passages, James moving with the confidence of someone who had mapped these routes thoroughly. Occasionally, he would stop to mark a wall or ceiling with a piece of chalk. Stress points, he explained, where the support structure is weakest. Eventually, they reached a junction where the narrow maintenance tunnels connected to the main shaft. Here, they could hear the sounds of Bishop's operation clearly, voices the clank of metal power tools grinding against stone. They're preparing for extraction, James whispered. We need to create a diversion to get close enough to the support beams. Sarah peered around the corner. In the main tunnel, floodlights illuminated a team of workers in hard hats and respirators operating drilling equipment under the supervision of armed guards. Too many, she whispered back. We'll never get past them. We don't need to, James replied. He pointed to a beam directly above the workers. That's the key support. Damage it enough and the whole section collapses. How do we reach it? James handed her his revolver. You're still a good shot, I assume. Sarah checked the weapon. Good enough. 2 rounds right at the stress point where the beam meets the ceiling, James instructed. I'll create a distraction to clear the area. And how exactly will you do that? James smiled grimly. I'm going to have a word with Bishop. Before Sarah could protest, he slipped away, moving along a parallel tunnel that would lead him to another junction. Sarah positioned herself at the corner, revolver, ready, heart pounding. She couldn't believe she was doing this, sabotaging a mind participating in what sounded like an occult ritual. Yet the evidence of her own eyes, the conviction of her father and Joseph in the strange presence she'd felt at the well, all of it pushed her toward belief. Minutes passed. Then from further down the main shaft, she heard her father's voice amplified by the tunnel acoustics. Marcus Bishop. I've come to discuss terms. The drilling stopped. The workers looked toward the voice, confused. One of the guards spoke into a radio. Sarah held her breath, waiting for her opportunity. A moment later, she heard what she'd been dreading. Bishop's smooth, calculated tones. James Callahan. I was wondering when you'd make an appearance. Coming to beg for your land back. Coming to make a trade, James replied. Something more valuable than the land. Something you want even more. And what might that be? Maya's true location. A pause. When Bishop spoke again, his voice had lost its casual confidence. I'm listening. Clear your men out, James demanded. Just you and me. Sarah watched as Bishop conferred with his security. Then, to her surprise, he ordered the workers and guards to retreat up the tunnel. 5 minutes, Bishop called to James. No weapons. You've got my interest, old man. As the workers cleared the area, Sarah lined up her shot. The beam was about 30 feet away, partially obscured by the tunnel's irregular shape. She'd have to be lucky to hit the stress point from this distance. She took a deep breath, steadied her hand, and fired. The first shot hit the beam, splintering wood. Workers further up the tunnel shouted in alarm. Sarah adjusted her aim and fired again. The second shot struck perfectly, causing a large crack to spread across the beam's width. As dust and debris began to rain down, she heard Bishop's furious shout, "It's a trap! Get back here!" Gunfire erupted from the direction her father had gone. Sarah's heart seized. She pressed herself against the wall as bullets ricocheted off stone near her position. "Dad," she called desperately. No answer came except more gunfire and the ominous groaning of the damaged support beam. Sarah made a split-second decision. She fired her remaining 4 rounds at the beam, then turned and ran back the way they'd come toward Joseph in the ritual chamber. Behind her, a thunderous crack signaled the beam's collapse. The tunnel shook as sections of ceiling gave way. Men screamed. Dust billowed through the passages like a living thing. Sarah ran blindly through the choking cloud, praying her father had somehow escaped. The thought that she might have just sealed him in with Bishop's men was unbearable. When she finally reached the ritual chamber, she found Joseph standing at the pool's edge, chanting in his native tongue. Around him, the herbs had been arranged in a precise pattern, and the stone figure placed at the north end of the pool. "Where's James?" he asked, interrupting his chant. "I don't know," Sarah replied, coughing dust from her lungs. The tunnel collapsed. There was gunfire. Joseph's expression darkened. "The ritual cannot be completed without the sacrifice." "I'm not sacrificing my father," Sarah snapped. "Without it, Maya cannot be bound," Joseph insisted. "She'll remain restless, dangerous, and the black metal will still be there, waiting for the next bishop to come along." A familiar voice spoke from the tunnel entrance. "Then perhaps we need a different sacrifice." They turned to see James standing there, blood streaming from a wound on his temple, but very much alive. Sarah rushed to him, relief flooding her system. "Thank God. I thought—" "Bishop got away," James interrupted, grimace crossing his face. "But his men are trapped or dead. The main shaft is completely blocked." "And the black metal," Joseph asked, "still there, still accessible through other routes?" James looked at the ritual preparations. "We need to finish this, Joseph." The old Navajo nodded gravely. "The binding requires blood freely given by the one whose line broke the seal." "I understand," James said. He turned to Sarah, his blue eyes suddenly clear and peaceful. "I need you to let me do this." "No," Sarah protested. "We'll find another way." James took her hands in his. "There is no other way. This is my responsibility, my family's debt." He glanced toward the pool. "Maya has waited long enough for justice." As if in response to his words, the black water began to stir. A shape rose from its center, not solid but not quite liquid either. It took the form of a woman, tall and terrible, her features shifting like smoke, but her eyes fixed and burning. "Maya." Sarah backed away involuntarily as the figure emerged, further water cascading from limbs that seemed too long, too fluid to be human. Joseph resumed his chanting more urgently now. The herbs around the pool's edge began to smolder, releasing a pungent smoke that curled around Maya's form like binding ropes. James approached the pool's edge, removing his jacket despite his injured shoulder. "I'm ready," he said to the apparition. Maya's head tilted, studying him. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the water, the stone, the very air. "Blood calls to blood," she said in a language Sarah somehow understood, despite never having heard it before. "A debt generations in the making." "I offer myself," James replied, "to seal your prison, to right the wrong done to you." Maya's form rippled, growing more substantial. "And what of the other debt? The woman who died at my threshold, the man who sought truth in darkness?" James faltered. "My wife, Sarah's husband. Their blood cries out," Maya continued. "Not against you, but against another. The debt is not fulfilled while he lives." A chill ran through Sarah as understanding dawned. "Bishop," she whispered. Maya's burning gaze shifted to her. "The bloodline that has hunted mine for generations, that killed your mate, that drove your mother to madness." "Marcus escaped the collapse," James said. "He'll be back with more men." "He is already here," Maya replied, her form expanding to fill the chamber. "Seeking another way in, seeking me." A splash of falling water drew their attention to a tunnel on the far side of the chamber, one Sarah hadn't noticed before. There, illuminated by the beam of a tactical flashlight, stood Marcus Bishop. Blood stained his expensive clothing, and rage twisted his features. "So this is where you've been hiding her?" he said, his voice eerily calm despite his appearance. He held a handgun at his side. The real prize. It's over, Bishop, Sarah said, stepping forward. The mine is collapsed. Your men are dead or trapped. Bishop shrugged. Acceptable losses. Do you have any idea what this discovery is worth? He gestured toward Maya, apparently seeing only a pool of unusual liquid, not the entity rising from it. Military applications alone will make the bishop name legendary. You're blind, Joseph said from beside the pool. You see the power, but not its cost. Bishop's laugh was hollow. Says the old man whose people have been squatting on valuable resources for centuries. He raised his gun, pointing it at Joseph. Step away from my property. No, Sarah said, moving to shield the old man. This ends now. Bishop redirected his aim toward her. Always the hero, Sarah. Just like Liam. Such a waste of potential. You had my husband killed, Sarah said, voice steady, despite her racing heart. Business is business, Bishop replied coldly. He was interfering with a project 3 generations in the making. And my mother, was she business too? A smile flickered across Bishop's face. Your mother was research. Quite insightful, actually, before the procedures damaged her cognition beyond repair. James lunged forward with a roar of fury, but Bishop's shot caught him in the chest. He collapsed at the edge of the pool, blood blooming across his shirt. Dad, Sarah cried, rushing to his side. Bishop kept his gun trained on them. Touching family reunion. Now, old man, he addressed Joseph. Finish whatever mumbo-jumbo you're doing and step away. My team will be breaking through within the hour. Joseph continued his chanting, ignoring the threat. The smoke from the burning herbs grew thicker, swirling around Maya's increasingly solid form. Last warning, Bishop said, aiming at Joseph's head. You cannot kill what is already dead. Maya's voice echoed through the chamber. And you cannot take what is not meant for you. For the first time, fear flickered across Bishop's face as he finally perceived the entity before him. What the hell? Sarah, cradling her father's bleeding form, watched as Maya rose to her full height, a towering presence that seemed to touch the unseen ceiling. Her body flowed like water, but held shape like flesh, and her eyes burned with the hatred of centuries. Marcus Bishop, Maya intoned, son of thieves, desecrator of sacred ground, murderer of innocence. Bishop fired wildly at the apparition bullets passing through her form to splash into the pool. Your grandfather took my people. Maya continued, advancing toward him. Your father took this woman's mother. You took her husband. Her arms elongated, reaching for him across impossible distance. Now I take you. Bishop screamed as Maya's liquid fingers wrapped around his throat. He fired again, emptying his magazine into her form without effect. Slowly, inexorably, she pulled him toward the pool. Sarah! James gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. The ritual must be completed. Joseph hurried to them, the obsidian knife in his hand. A willing sacrifice, he reminded them. James nodded weakly. I'm ready. Sarah held her father tighter. There has to be another way. No time, James wheezed. Bishop's men coming. Joseph raised the knife. Your blood will seal her prison forever. No one will be able to access the black metal again. As Joseph prepared to complete the ritual, Bishop's struggles grew more desperate. Wait, he screamed. I can give you anything, money, power, freedom. Maya's grip tightened. I have waited a century for justice. What use have I for your bribes? Sarah, Bishop called out in desperation. Stop this, we can make a deal. Sarah looked from her dying father to the man who had destroyed her family. A terrible clarity washed over her. Joseph, she said quietly, the ritual requires the blood of the one whose family broke the seal, whose debt remains unpaid. Joseph paused, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. Yes. Bishop's grandfather was the mine supervisor, Sarah continued, the one who ordered the breakthrough, the one truly responsible. James coughed weakly. Sarah, no. The bloodline that has hunted for generations, Sarah quoted, rising to her feet. Maya wants Bishop, not you. Joseph considered this, then nodded slowly. The debt could be paid with his blood instead. No, Namakan, Bishop screamed as Maya drew him closer to the pool. You can't do this. This is murder. This is justice, Sarah replied. For my husband, for my mother, for everyone your family has destroyed in pursuit of power." As Bishop reached the pool's edge, Joseph handed the obsidian knife to Sarah. "If you choose this path, you must be the one to complete it." Sarah took the knife, its weight, both terrible and righteous, in her hand. She approached Bishop as Maya held him at the threshold of the black water. "Please," Bishop begged, all pretense of strength gone. "I have money influence." "What you have," Sarah interrupted, "is a debt, and it's time to pay." With a swift, decisive motion, Sarah drew the blade across Bishop's throat. His eyes widened in shock as blood poured from the wound, streaming down into the pool. The effect was immediate. The black water began to boil and Maya's form grew more substantial with each drop of Bishop's blood that merged with it. "The binding is complete," Joseph announced as Bishop's struggles weakened. "Maya accepts the sacrifice." The dying man's blood continued to flow into the pool, turning its surface a deep crimson. Maya released her grip, allowing Bishop's body to crumple at the edge. "And now?" Sarah asked, the knife still clutched in her trembling hand. Joseph gestured toward her father. "Now we say goodbye." Sarah rushed back to James, who lay pale and still, but breathing faintly. She cradled his head in her lap. "Dad, hold on. We'll get you out of here." James smiled weakly. "No need. My part is done." His eyes drifted toward Maya, who now stood completely solid at the center of the pool, watching them with ancient eyes. "She's at peace now. The debt is paid." "Not all of it," Maya's voice echoed softly. "Your bloodline tried to warn others, tried to protect. That debt I acknowledge." She approached James, kneeling beside him at the pool's edge. With gentle hands that no longer flowed like water, she touched his wound. "Rest now, guardian," she said. "Your watch is ended." James let out a long breath, his eyes closing, as peace settled over his features. Sarah felt his body grow still in her arms. Maya turned to Sarah. "Daughter of guardians, wife of truth seekers, what will you do now?" Sarah looked up at the entity, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know." "The black metal remains," Joseph warned. "Sealed for now, but others will come looking." "Then I'll be waiting," Sarah replied, her grief hardening into resolve. "Someone has to keep watch." Maya studied her with those burning eyes. "A new guardian," she said approvingly. "But remember, I am not your ally. I am justice. I am memory. I am the debt that must always be paid." With those words, Maya's form began to dissolve, sinking back into the pool. The black water calmed, returning to its obsidian stillness. Joseph laid a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We should go. Bishop's men will find another way in eventually." Sarah nodded gently, laying her father's body beside the pool. "What happens now to the mine, to Maya?" "The binding is complete," Joseph explained as they made their way back toward the tunnels. "Maya will sleep again, guarding the black metal. No one can extract it without awakening her wrath. And Bishop's company, without Marcus it will falter." Fragment. Joseph's expression was grim but satisfied. His father is long dead. There are no direct heirs. They navigated the tunnels in silence, Sarah's mind swirling with grief and purpose. By the time they emerged from the emergency exit, dawn was breaking over the nameless ground. In the distance, they could see confusion at the main shaft. Workers trying to clear the collapsed security personnel, milling about without leadership. "They'll be looking for us soon," Joseph observed. Sarah nodded, her decision already made. "Let them come." She turned to look at her father's house, at the well-standing sentinel in the yard. The weight of understanding settled on her shoulders. A new purpose, a new identity. The guardian of nameless ground. 3 days after Marcus Bishop's death, the vultures arrived. Not the birds that circled in the harsh desert sky, but the kind that wore expensive suits and carried legal paperwork. They parked sleek vehicles at the edge of the property, eyeing the weathered house with poorly concealed disdain. Sarah watched them from the porch, her father's revolver visible on her hip. The morning sun cast long shadows across the nameless ground, as men in dark suits conferred beside their cars, occasionally glancing her way. Joseph Quaid sat in a rocking chair beside her, seemingly asleep but missing nothing. His cane rested against the porch railing, worn smooth from years of use. "Here they come," he murmured as one man detached from the group and approached the house. The man was in his 50s, expensively groomed with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting his way. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, removing his sunglasses with practiced precision. Ms. Callahan, his smile was professional empty. Richard Harmon, legal counsel for Westland Development Corporation. I was hoping we might have a word. Sarah didn't rise from her chair. About the unfortunate situation regarding our CEO. Harmon's smile never wavered. Marcus Bishop's disappearance has been most distressing for the company. Disappearance, Sarah repeated flatly. That is the current classification, yes. Harmon adjusted his tie. Along with several of our security personnel. I understand there was some kind of mining accident. Sarah met his gaze directly. Something like that. Harmon cleared his throat. Ms. Callahan, Westland Development has a legally binding agreement with your father regarding this property. We would like to honor that agreement despite these unfortunate events. My father never signed anything with Westland, Sarah replied. Any document claiming otherwise is a forgery. I assure you the paperwork is in order. Harmon produced a folder from his briefcase. Mr. Bishop was very thorough about such matters. Mr. Bishop was very thorough about murder too, Sarah said coldly, including that of my husband, Liam Garrison. Harmon's composed expression flickered briefly. That's a serious accusation. Not an accusation, a fact. Sarah stood her hand resting near the revolver. Just like it's a fact that Westland illegally detained and experimented on my mother 30 years ago, and a fact that Bishop's men shot my father 3 days ago. Harmon's professional demeanor cracked further. Ms. Callahan, these wild allegations aren't wild at all, Sarah interrupted. They're documented by my husband before his death, by my father after, and now by me. She descended the porch steps, slowly maintaining eye contact. I've spent the last 3 days compiling everything. Evidence, witness statements, financial records, all pointing to decades of criminal activity by Westland Development. It wasn't entirely true, but it was a calculated risk. Sarah had indeed found boxes of her father's research in the shed. Newspaper clippings, property records, even photographs of Westland employees removing something from the mine years ago. Not enough for a conviction, but enough to cause problems. These documents have been sent to federal authorities, she continued, along with geological surveys identifying unusual mineral deposits on this land that might interest certain government agencies. Harmon paled slightly. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah replied. I'm telling you that Westland's interest in this property has nothing to do with resort development and everything to do with what's buried underneath it. Something the military might find very interesting or very concerning. Joseph rose from his chair, joining Sarah at the steps. Your company has spilled enough blood on this land, he added quietly. It remembers every drop. Harmon looked between them, weighing options. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement that would be mutually beneficial. There's only one arrangement I'm interested in, Sarah said. Westland Development ceases all claims to this property permanently. No appeals, no legal challenges. That's hardly reasonable. In exchange, Sarah continued as if he hadn't spoken, I hold back certain documents detailing experiments conducted under Westland supervision, the kind that would interest not just federal authorities, but international human rights tribunals. It was another bluff, she had no such specific evidence, but the flicker of recognition in Harmon's eyes told her the experiments had been real. I'll need to consult with the board, Harmon said finally. 24 hours, Sarah replied. After that, everything goes public. The lawyer retreated to the waiting group of executives. Sarah watched them confer, voices raised in occasional argument. You're playing a dangerous game, Joseph observed. These are powerful people. So was Bishop, Sarah replied. Look what happened to him. Joseph's weathered face creased in a rare smile. The Black Angel returns. Sarah didn't answer. The name felt different now, less a badge of honor, more a solemn duty, a designation for the guardian of a terrible secret. The lawyers departed within the hour, dust clouds trailing their expensive vehicles. By evening, a courier delivered preliminary paperwork, relinquishing all Westland claims to the Callahan property. Sarah signed where indicated her signature, firm and decisive, next to the blank space where her father's would have been. After the courier left, she sat with Joseph on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in crimson and gold. They'll be back, Joseph warned. Maybe not Westland, but others. The knowledge of what lies beneath this ground won't stay buried forever. Then we'll be ready, Sarah replied. She looked toward the well standing black against the reddening sky. All of us. Later that night, after Joseph had returned to his own home, Sarah approached the well alone. She stood at its edge, peering into darkness that seemed to have no bottom. I know you're there, she said softly. I know you're listening. The night air stirred, carrying the scent of rain, though no clouds marred the star-filled sky. We made a pact, Sarah continued. Your justice for my guardianship. I need to know you'll honor it. For a long moment, only silence answered her. Then, like water rising through stone, a whisper reached her ears. As long as the debt remains paid, Maya's voice replied from the depths. As long as the seal remains unbroken. Sarah nodded, accepting the terms. Then we understand each other. From that night forward, she dreamed of dark water and a woman with eyes like burning coals. Not nightmares as before, but communications. Warnings when strangers approached the land. Revelations about what lay beneath it. Sarah Callahan, once sheriff, once exile, now guardian, had returned to the nameless ground. And this time she wasn't leaving. 6 months passed. Summer heat gave way to the gentler warmth of autumn. The house stood stronger now, its weathered boards repaired, its porch reinforced. Sarah had used part of Westland's settlement money to restore her father's property, turning the ghost of a home into something solid again, but nothing could repair the town itself. The nameless settlement remained mostly abandoned, its few residents keeping to themselves, avoiding the Callahan property and the woman who now protected it. On a crisp October morning, Sarah sat cleaning her weapons at the kitchen table. Her Glock and her father's revolver laid out on a cloth beside a mug of cooling coffee. A newspaper from the nearest town lay open beside them, a small headline circled in red. Bishop Industries acquires Westland assets in corporate takeover. Joseph entered without knocking, as had become his habit. He glanced at the newspaper as he settled into a chair across from her. Trouble, he observed. Could be, Sarah agreed, reassembling the Glock with practiced efficiency. Harmon hinted at restructuring when he delivered the final paperwork last month. Didn't mention Bishop Industries. Different branch of the same tree, Joseph said, accepting the coffee Sarah poured him. Marcus's cousin, David Bishop. Less direct bloodline, but still family. Sarah frowned. How do you know so much about Bishop's family? My people have been watching his people for generations. Joseph replied simply. The name changes, the face changes, but the hunger remains the same. Sarah holstered the Glock at her hip. Think they'll come for the land again? Eventually. Joseph sipped his coffee. They always do. A distant rumble of vehicles drew their attention. Sarah moved to the window, watching as 3 black SUVs approached on the dusty road. Speak of the devil, she murmured. Joseph joined her at the window. More lawyers. Not with that convoy. Sarah checked her weapon, then grabbed a pair of binoculars from the kitchen counter. Through them, she could make out the Bishop Industries logo on the lead vehicle. Looks like the new management wants to introduce themselves personally. They moved to the porch, standing side by side as the vehicles pulled up to the property boundary. 6 men emerged, 4 with the unmistakable bearing of security personnel and 2 in business attire. The leader stepped forward, younger than Marcus had been, with the same golden hair but softer features. David Bishop had the look of someone born to wealth but not to authority, constantly trying to prove himself worthy of both. Ms. Callahan, he called. David Bishop. I was hoping we might have a word. Sarah descended the porch steps, keeping her right hand free near her holster. Seems like the Bishop family has a habit of showing up uninvited. David forced a smile. Family trait, I suppose. May I approach? I'd rather not shout this conversation across your yard. Sarah nodded but remained alert as David walked forward alone, leaving his security detail by the vehicles. Thank you for seeing me, he said when he reached her. I wanted to personally address any concerns you might have about Bishop Industries' acquisition of Westland. My only concern is whether you plan to honor Westland's agreement to leave this land alone, Sarah replied. David's smile became more genuine. Direct. I appreciate that. He gestured toward the house. Perhaps we could discuss this inside. We can discuss it right here. David nodded, accepting the boundary. Very well. To answer your question, yes, Bishop Industries will honor all prior agreements made by Westland. He studied her face. I'm not my cousin, Ms. Callahan. Marcus's methods weren't universally approved within the family. Yet you benefited from them, Sarah observed. Business is business, David acknowledged, but that doesn't mean it has to be conducted without ethics. Sarah didn't bother hiding her skepticism. What do you want, Mr. Bishop? You didn't bring a security detail just to tell me you'll honor existing agreements? David hesitated, then reached slowly into his jacket. Sarah's hand moved to her weapon, but he produced only a small leather notebook. This belonged to my grandfather, he explained, holding it out to her. His private journal. It contains entries about this land, about the unusual material found here, and about a woman named Maya. Sarah didn't take the notebook. Why show this to me? Because I want you to understand that I know what's buried here. David's expression grew serious. And unlike Marcus, I don't want to extract it. I want to ensure it remains sealed. Joseph stepped forward, his cane tapping against the hard earth. The Bishop bloodline has sought the black metal for generations. Why should we believe you're different? David turned to the old man. Mr. Quaid, I presume my grandfather wrote about your family as well. He opened the notebook, turning to a marked page. He called your grandfather the last one who understood the true danger. Joseph's expression remained skeptical, but he reached for the notebook. Sarah let him take it, watching David carefully for any sign of deception. As Joseph read, his weathered face grew increasingly grave. These are ritual descriptions, he said finally. Binding ceremonies. Containment protocols. He looked up at David. Where did your grandfather get this information? From the original miners' reports, David replied, and from his own experiments. He turned to Sarah. Experiments that included your mother, Ms. Callahan, for which I can only offer my deepest apologies. Sarah felt cold anger rising. Apologies don't undo what your family did. No, they don't, David agreed solemnly. But perhaps this might help. He gestured toward the lead SUV, and a man emerged carrying a metal briefcase. As the man approached, David continued, Bishop Industries has officially divested from all mineral extraction operations. We're refocusing entirely on sustainable development and technology. He accepted the briefcase and placed it on the ground between them. This contains all remaining documents related to Project Obsidian. My grandfather's name for the black metal research. Lab reports, test results, geological surveys. Sarah made no move toward the briefcase. Why give this to me? Because I want it destroyed, David said simply. All of it. The research, the surveys, the records of the material's location. His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. My grandfather's journal describes what happened to the test subjects exposed to the metal, what it did to their minds, what they saw in their final moments. You're afraid, Joseph observed. Terrified, David admitted without hesitation. Anyone with sense would be. Marcus didn't believe the stories, thought they were just superstitious nonsense meant to scare off competitors. A shadow crossed his face. I know better. Sarah studied him, looking for the deception, the hidden agenda. But all she saw was genuine fear, the kind that comes from understanding something truly dangerous. Why come here in person? She asked. Why not just destroy the documents yourself? Because the land needs to know my intentions, David replied, and for the first time Sarah felt he was being completely honest. It needs to know the Bishop family is ending its claim. Forever. Joseph had continued reading the journal, his expression darkening with each page. Finally, he closed it and handed it to Sarah. Look at the last entry, he said quietly. Sarah opened the journal to the final written page. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. I have seen her now. The woman from the well. She stands at the foot of my bed each night watching, waiting. The doctors say it's a hallucination caused by my medication, but I know better. She has found me. After all these years, all these miles, she has found me. The debt must be paid. God forgive me for what I've done. The entry was dated just 3 days before Bishop's grandfather had died of an apparent stroke. Sarah closed the journal and looked at David. You believe she killed him? I believe justice found him, David corrected, and I don't want to be next. Sarah considered his words, then nodded toward the briefcase. Open it. David knelt and unlocked the case, revealing neatly organized files, electronic drives, and what appeared to be small samples of black material sealed in lead containers. All of it, he said. Every record, every sample, every piece of research conducted over 3 generations. Sarah exchanged a glance with Joseph, who gave a slight nod. Take the samples to the well, she instructed David. Personally, drop them in. David looked toward the stone structure with obvious apprehension. Is that safe? Safer than keeping them, Joseph replied. With clear reluctance, David removed the lead containers from the briefcase. There were 3 of them each about the size of a matchbox. Your men stay where they are, Sarah instructed, her hand resting on her weapon. This is between you and what's in that well. David swallowed hard but nodded. He walked slowly toward the well, the containers clutched in his trembling hand. Sarah and Joseph followed at a distance, watching as he approached the ancient structure. The morning had been still, but now a breeze rose, stirring the dust around David's feet. At the well's edge, he hesitated, peering down into darkness. Hello, he called, his voice barely above a whisper. From where she stood, Sarah could see nothing unusual, but David suddenly straightened as if addressing someone. I've come to return what was taken, he said, his voice carrying on the wind, and to end my family's claim to this land. He opened the first container, tipping a small amount of black, iridescent material into the well. The second and third followed. As the final sample fell into darkness, a sound rose from the depths. Not quite a sigh, not quite a moan, but something between gratitude and hunger. David backed away quickly, nearly stumbling in his haste to return to Sarah and Joseph. She's there, he gasped. She spoke to me. What did she say? Joseph asked. She said the debt isn't fully paid. David's face had gone pale. She said there's still one more bishop who knows too much. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. You! David nodded, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. That's why I felt compelled to come here. Why I couldn't just send representatives. He looked back at the well. She was calling me. Maya's justice is absolute, Joseph said quietly. The price for knowledge of the black metal has always been the same. David's security detail was watching with increasing concern, one man speaking urgently into a radio. Sarah knew they would approach soon if their employer didn't return. What happens now? David asked, a tremor in his voice. Sarah looked toward the well, then back at the frightened man before her. In many ways, he was nothing like his cousin. Softer, less calculating, genuinely remorseful for his family's sins. But the blood that flowed in his veins was the same. That depends, she said finally. Are you willing to pay your family's debt to truly end it? I'm not. I don't want to die, David stammered. Maya doesn't always demand life, Joseph interjected. Sometimes she accepts other sacrifices, equally binding, equally permanent. Hope flickered in David's eyes. What kind of sacrifice? Renunciation, Joseph explained. Not just of claim to the land, but of memory, of knowledge. He tapped his temple. Everything you know about the black metal, about Maya, about this place, given up willingly, forever. How is that possible? David asked. Joseph reached into his pocket and produced a small leather pouch, similar to the one he'd used during the binding ritual months before. Our people have ways, he said simply, but the choice must be yours, freely made. David looked between them, then back at the well. And if I refuse? Then you leave here today, Sarah answered honestly. Return to your life, your company, your family. She met his gaze steadily. But she'll be waiting, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Understanding settled over David's features. He nodded slowly, decision made. What do I need to do? Joseph opened the pouch and removed a small amount of dark powder. Kneel, he instructed. David complied, kneeling on the hard desert earth. His security detail had begun moving toward them, but Sarah raised a hand, halting their approach. Close your eyes, Joseph continued, and speak your renunciation aloud. David drew a deep breath. I, David Bishop, renounce all knowledge of the black metal of Maya, of the nameless ground. I surrender my family's claim to this land and its secrets now and forever. His voice strengthened with each word. Let this be the final payment of the bishop debt. Joseph sprinkled the powder in a circle around David's kneeling form, then placed his weathered hand on the younger man's forehead. "What is given cannot be returned," he said in his native tongue. "What is forgotten cannot be remembered." A strange stillness fell over the yard. Even the approaching security team seemed frozen in place. The air grew thick-charged, as if a storm approached, though the sky remained clear. Joseph spoke words in a language Sarah didn't recognize. Ancient, powerful words that seemed to resonate from the earth itself. As he did, a thin mist rose from the ground around David, encircling him like embracing arms. David's expression went slack, his eyes still closed but moving rapidly beneath the lids, as if watching scenes only he could see. His lips moved silently, releasing words, names, memories into the waiting mist. The ceremony lasted perhaps 5 minutes, though. To Sarah, it felt both longer and shorter, time behaving strangely in the presence of whatever power Joseph had invoked. When it ended, the mist dissipated as suddenly as it had appeared. David remained kneeling, eyes closed, breathing deeply, as if waking from a dream. Joseph stepped back, his own face drawn with exhaustion. "It is done," he murmured to Sarah. "The knowledge is gone, given to the earth." David's eyes fluttered open. He looked around with confusion, then up at Sarah and Joseph with no recognition. "What happened?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "Who are you people?" Sarah helped him to his feet as his security team finally reached them. "You came to discuss the land purchase," she explained calmly, "but decided against it. Bishop Industries will be divesting from all Westland holdings in this region, effective immediately." David rubbed his temple, clearly disoriented, but accepting the explanation. "Yes, that sounds right. We're refocusing on sustainable development." He blinked several times. "I'm sorry, I seem to have lost my train of thought." "It happens in this heat," Sarah replied. "Your team should get you back to your vehicle." The security personnel exchanged concerned glances, but ushered their employer toward the waiting SUVs. David went willingly, casting one last confused look back at the Callahan property before climbing into the lead vehicle. As the convoy pulled away, Joseph leaned heavily on his cane. "It worked," he said, satisfaction in his tired voice. The knowledge is gone from his mind, given to Maya as payment. Sarah watched the dust clouds fade on the horizon. "Will it be enough for her?" Joseph nodded toward the well. "See for yourself." Sarah approached cautiously. The morning sun now shone directly into the circular opening, illuminating what had always been darkness before. At the bottom, water gleamed, not black as it had been in the underground chamber, but clear and still reflecting the sky above. "She's at peace," Joseph said, joining her. "For now." Sarah nodded, understanding the implication. Maya's justice was satisfied for the moment, the bishop debt considered paid. But the black metal remained beneath the earth, and knowledge of it still existed in records they might never find in minds they couldn't reach. "The guardianship continues," she said quietly. "It always will," Joseph agreed. "That's why I've been training my granddaughter. She'll take my place when the time comes." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "You never mentioned a granddaughter." Joseph smiled faintly. "Some secrets are kept even from you, Black Angel." He gazed out over the property. "This land will always need protectors, people who understand what sleeps beneath it." Later that evening, after Joseph had departed, Sarah sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The briefcase of Bishop research lay open beside her, its contents sorted for burning. One file had caught her attention, a manila folder labeled Garrison L. Inside, she had found the truth she'd sought for 10 years. Surveillance photos of Liam in the days before his death, internal memos discussing his investigation, and finally the order for his elimination and signed by Marcus Bishop himself. Sarah closed the file, her heart heavy with vindication and grief. Tomorrow she would burn it all, erasing the last official records of the black metal of Maya, of the Bishop family's obsession. But tonight she would remember. For herself, for her father, for Liam. Those who had paid the price for knowledge that should have remained buried. As darkness fell, Sarah moved to the well. She placed a hand on its weathered stone edge, feeling the cool air rise from below. "We keep our bargain," she said softly. "You and I." From the depths came the faintest whisper, like water flowing over stone. "Always." Sarah Callahan turned back toward the house that was now truly hers, the weight of guardianship settling on her shoulders like an invisible badge. The Black Angel had found a new purpose, A new jurisdiction. Not enforcing human laws, but something older, something deeper. Justice beneath the earth. 1 year later, a single car approached the Callahan property. Sarah watched from the porch, her hand resting near her weapon, more from habit than necessity. The car, a modest sedan rather than the government vehicles or corporate SUVs she'd grown accustomed to, parked at the edge of the yard. A young woman emerged, late 20s, perhaps, with a familiar set to her shoulders. Sarah recognized her instantly, though they'd never met. "Kelly Garrison," she said as the woman approached. "You have your father's eyes." Liam's daughter stopped at the foot of the porch steps, surprise evident on her face. "You remember me. I've kept track," Sarah admitted. From a distance, Kelly studied her former stepmother, the woman who had been sheriff when Kelly was just a child, who had vanished from her life after her father's murder. "Took me a while to find you," Kelly said. "This place isn't exactly on maps." "That's the idea." Sarah gestured to the chair beside her. "Come sit. You've had a long drive." Kelly climbed the steps hesitantly, settling into the offered chair. For a long moment, they sat in silence, each measuring the other against memories. "Why now?" Sarah asked finally. "After all this time." Kelly reached into her shoulder bag and produced a thick manila envelope. "I've been going through Dad's things. Found this hidden in a safe deposit box. Instructions said to open it 10 years after his death." She handed the envelope to Sarah. "Most of it's addressed to you." Sarah accepted the envelope with steady hands that belied her racing heart. Inside, she found documents familiar to her police instincts. Investigation notes, photographs, financial records. Liam's personal investigation into Westland Development and the Bishop family. "He was building a case," Kelly explained. "Something big involving government contracts, experimental materials, human testing." She watched Sarah's face carefully. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," Sarah admitted, leafing through the file. "Your father was close to exposing something terrible when he died." "Murdered," Kelly corrected sharply. "Not died, murdered." Sarah looked up, meeting the younger woman's fierce gaze. "Yes, murdered. By the same people these files implicate." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Those responsible have faced justice." "What kind of justice?" Kelly demanded. "Marcus Bishop disappeared last year, never charged with anything. His cousin runs the company, now completely restructured. No one was ever prosecuted for Dad's murder." Sarah set the files aside. "Not all justice happens in courtrooms, Kelly." Something in her tone made Kelly study her more intently. "What did you do?" "What was necessary," Sarah replied simply. The young woman fell silent, processing this. Finally, she asked, "Is it over then? Whatever Dad was investigating?" Sarah looked toward the well-standing silent sentinel in the yard. "For now." "That's not very reassuring." "It's the truth." Sarah turned back to her. "Some things can't be destroyed, only contained. Watched. Protected. By you?" Kelly asked skeptically. "By whoever takes up the responsibility," Sarah replied. She nodded toward the files. "Your father understood that. It's why he kept his investigation secret, why he left these instructions." Kelly looked out over the property, taking in the harsh beauty of the desert landscape. "This place, it's important somehow, isn't it? To whatever Dad was investigating." "This land remembers," Sarah said, echoing words Joseph had spoken to her. "Everything that happens here leaves a mark." "You sound like the locals in town," Kelly observed. "They have stories about this place. About you." A slight smile touched her lips. "The Black Angel returned from exile to guard forgotten secrets." Sarah shrugged. "People talk." "Is it true?" Kelly pressed. "Are you guarding something?" Sarah considered the young woman before her. Liam's daughter, with his determination in her eyes and his sense of justice evident in her pursuit of truth. Some secrets weren't meant to be shared, but some burdens weren't meant to be carried alone. "Come with me," Sarah said, rising from her chair. "There's something I need to show you." She led Kelly across the yard to the well. The morning sun cast their shadows long across the ground as they stood at the ancient structure's edge. "Look down," Sarah instructed softly. Kelly peered into the well, her expression changing from curiosity to confusion. "The water, it's moving, but there's no wind." "It does that sometimes," Sarah replied. "When she's listening." When who's listening? Instead of answering directly, Sarah placed a hand on Kelly's shoulder. Your father died trying to protect people from something dangerous, something that should stay buried. Kelly looked up from the well, meeting Sarah's gaze. The files mentioned a material, something with unusual properties. It's more than that, Sarah said. It's alive in its way, aware, and it's been here a very long time. As if in response to her words, a soft sound rose from the well. Not quite a whisper, not quite a sigh. Kelly stepped back instinctively. What was that? The guardian, Sarah answered. The one who was here long before me. A mixture of fear and fascination crossed Kelly's face. Dad knew about this. He was getting close, Sarah confirmed. Too close. That's why they killed him. Kelly stared at the well, then back at Sarah. Why show me this? Why tell me? Because you deserve to know what your father died for, Sarah replied, and because someday I'll need someone to take my place. Understanding dawned in Kelly's eyes. You want me to, what, stay here, guard a well? Not today, Sarah said with a small smile. Not tomorrow, but eventually yes. This burden passes through blood. Your father understood that, even if he never got the chance to explain it to you. Kelly shook her head in disbelief. This is crazy. I have a life, a career. As did I, Sarah interrupted gently. As did your father. As did mine. She gestured toward the house. Come inside. There's more you need to know before you decide. They spent the day together, Sarah revealing the history of the nameless ground of Maya, of the black metal that still lay buried in the sealed mine. She showed Kelly Joseph's ritual materials, her father's research, the journal of Bishop's grandfather. As the sun began to set, they returned to the porch, each lost in their own thoughts. It's a lot to take in, Sarah acknowledged. Kelly nodded slowly. If even half of what you've told me is true. It's all true, Sarah assured her. Every word. Kelly turned to her, eyes troubled. What happens if I say no? If I walk away and never come back? Then I continue alone, Sarah replied simply. Until I can't anymore. And then someone else will be called. She looked out over the darkening landscape. The land always finds its guardian. Kelly followed her gaze, seeing the nameless ground in a new light. Not just harsh desert, but a living entity with secrets buried in its depths. I need time, she said finally, to think about all this. Of course, Sarah agreed. Take all the time you need. As twilight deepened, they walked to Kelly's car together. Before getting in, the younger woman hesitated. The stories people tell about you in town, she said, about the black angel who speaks to the dead and delivers justice where the law can't reach. She studied Sarah's face carefully. They're afraid of you. Sarah nodded. Fear keeps people away, and that keeps them safe. Is that what this is about, keeping people safe? It's about balance, Sarah corrected. About debts paid and justice served. About remembering what others want forgotten. She placed a hand on the car door. Your father understood that better than most. Kelly started the engine but left her window down. I'll be back, she said, and Sarah heard the decision already forming behind the words. I know, Sarah replied. The land remembers blood. She stood watching as the car's taillights disappeared down the dusty road, twin red eyes swallowed by darkness. Then she turned back toward the house, toward the well waiting in shadow. The nameless ground had found its guardian in Sarah Callahan, and someday it would find another in Kelly Garrison. The cycle would continue as it had for generations, each watcher passing the burden to the next. Justice beneath the earth. Memory in darkness. Debts always paid. Sarah approached the well one last time before retiring for the night. She placed her hand on its weathered stone, feeling the cool breath rising from below. She'll return, she said softly, when she's ready. From the depths came the faintest of replies. Not words exactly, but understanding, acknowledgement, patience. The Black Angel of Arizona lifted her face to the star-filled sky, accepting the weight of her duty with the same resolve that had once made her a legendary sheriff. Some grounds had no name. Some angels wore no wings. Some justice came not from law, but from deeper, older sources. And some debts could never truly be forgotten, only passed from guardian to guardian, as eternal as the nameless ground itself.